Hey everyone, so it's Hearth and welcome back to my channel. On today's video, we're going through the Witchcraft books that I've read from November through to January. And let's talk about the things that I liked and didn't like so much about all of these books. Hopefully, some of these might inspire your own magical practice, or at the very least, it might allow you to make more informed decisions about the books that you're purchasing. And there's quite a few books this quarter, so we have books on the air element, on folk magic, on Wiccan witchcraft, as well as on familiars and fairies, so there's quite a big variety in this list. Before we get too far into this, I do just want to say that these reviews are based on my own experiences and my own practice, and that everyone is going to be different. If I love a book, you might not like it, and vice versa. Before purchasing any book, please make sure that you do your research on the book itself, the author's practice, and also read lots of reviews from lots of different people to make sure that a book is suitable for you and your practice. Okay, with that being said, let's get into this. The first book we're going to be talking about is called The Flame in the Cauldron by Orion Foxwood. Many of you will likely recognise the name of this book, as I did mention it in one of my book hauls that I got from Glastonbury, and I was really excited to give it a read. Now, the information on this book goes as follows. Few words entice and incite like the word witchery. Thousands of self-identified witches, pagans, and magical practitioners embrace the word, but seldom go beyond the practice of the well-accepted and learned forms of traditional witchcraft to explore the path of old witchery. Orion Foxwood invites readers to walk on the path of old-style witchery, a nature-based practice that is as old as the swamps and as wild as the woods. For the first time, Foxwood reveals some of his own deeply personal rituals and spells directly from his own grimoire of witchery. He highlights the differences and similarities between Wicca, traditional witchcraft, and old-style witchery, by weaving his own path to witchery throughout the book. He gives readers examples of how to identify the way toward this path. There is a revolution among the pagan and witchcraft communities, a movement away from prescribed ritual and neo-pagan practices, and a reaching back towards what Foxwood says is the heart of any true witch, a thundering call deep within their very blood to become a healer, a reckoner, a protector of magical arts, and a guardian of the wild wood. And I fell in love with that little description of the book, and so I just had to get it. When I'd finished reading this book, I ended up giving it a fairly average review. It wasn't a book that blew my socks off, and it probably isn't one that I would go back to time and time again, but I can understand why some people would really love it. I just didn't really resonate with the teachings and the practices within this book as a part of my tradition. And I think that's important to say here. Witchcraft is so variable. There are thousands of different ways of doing any given thing, and this book just wasn't really for me. It does cover a wide array of different topics, which I think could be really interesting for some people. This includes the witch blood and the witch knowing, treading the mill of magic, tapping the essence, the living gods of the old art, and the conjuration of the witch flame. It's just that everything in this book, at least as far as I can recall, really heavily based itself on the idea of this witch flame as a central, integral part of the practice. But I didn't really vibe with that practice or that technique, and so a lot of the book to me was kind of lost because that central aspect of it was something that I didn't really vibe with. I think, though, that if you are interested in old-style witchery, this one could be a really good read to check out, and it might be something that you resonate really strongly with. So check out some reviews, see what they think of the book. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you think as well. But yeah, this is one that I think other people could really love. It just wasn't necessarily the right fit for me and my practice. The next book is The Witch's Familiar by Grimassi. Now, this one is a really famous book, and I did enjoy it, but it's definitely got some pros and some cons for me. Many of you will likely have heard of Grimassi. He was a phenomenal author. Sadly, he is no longer with us today, but his works are world famous, and this is the one book of his that I got recommended more than any other. Now, the information on this book goes as follows. Would you recognize a familiar spirit? Since ancient times, witches and magicians have worked magic with the aid of familiars or helpful spirits. Familiars may take the form of a beloved pet, a totem animal, or even a helpful, non-physical entity. Explore the fascinating history of familiar spirits in The Witch's Familiar, written by one of today's leading authorities on both Wicca and traditional hereditary witchcraft. This book is your complete guide to finding and working with a familiar. Explore the 3 types of familiar: physical, astral, and spiritual. Learn how to call a familiar to you, and how to choose an appropriate name. Discover how to use magical seals and sigils to command or release a non-physical familiar. Protect yourself and your loved ones by asking your familiar to guard your home. Make your magic even more potent by enlisting your familiar's aid in spellwork and ritual. Keep your bonds strong and find out how to release a familiar when its work is done or it has passed from the physical plane. This is the first book to present never-before-published traditional craft methods for working with familiars, as well as historical examples from Western ceremonial magic. Your magic will be even more powerful when you combine forces with a familiar face. And this one has been in my collection for quite a long time, and I had just never gotten around to finishing the entire book. And now that I have, I can say that some of this book I absolutely love, and some of this book I wouldn't necessarily add into my own practice because I find that I have better alternative techniques. And so this is another, I know, quite shocking. Normally I give pretty good reviews. This is another middle-of-the-road book. There are aspects of this book that I would give 5 stars any day of the week, and there are other aspects that I just didn't vibe with quite as well. Now, this book covers so many different things, so I will quickly go through the contents list. So it goes over the history of the familiar spirit, the concepts, non-physical familiars, all about the church and familiars, as well as courts and familiars, and also modern witches and their familiars. It goes into choosing your familiar, along with journeying and journey quests, magical cords, controlling a familiar, genesis seals, seals of calling, departing, protection, dreaming, carrying a spell, and protection against unwanted familiars. There's also the seal of severance and binding, the controlling of an errant familiar, and so many aspects of working with spirit familiars, and this is the section I really, really love. It goes over the seal of vortex, using magical seals, and the ethics of using magical seals. It also includes a section on a relationship with familiars, including merging with the familiars and also working with non-physical familiars. It also includes working with a familiar in regards to healing and magic, how to suitably house a familiar, and how to create an artificial familiar in the form of a servitor. It also goes into elemental condensers, absorption and protection of the elements, and different exercises and techniques. And that section I adore. If I could read that section 1,000 times over, I probably would, because I really enjoy it. Then it goes over guardian familiars, personal protections, dream guardians, plant familiars, as well as working with magical plants and thought form familiars, parting with familiars with astral doorways, etheric parasites, the astral substance, crossing over rituals, rituals for dissolving. And honestly, there's a lot in this book that I really, really love. Ultimately, I think it comes down to what you consider a familiar to be. Now, this book does cover 3 different varieties of familiar, as it was mentioned. It covers spirit familiars, these being spirits that reside in the spiritual planes that are separate from you, that you enlist and enter into a contract with to aid you in spellwork and ritual and other magical means. This is the kind of familiar that I am most comfortable with, that I am most familiar with, pun intended, because this is what I was always taught when it comes to a familiar spirit and that familiar connection. You also have servitors. These are man-made spirits, so spirits that you have created for a specific purpose out of your own energy, and they do not exist without you existing. So it's not like a spirit that exists in its own right, it's a man-made spirit that you have created. And then you also have the idea of familiars being pets. Now, for me, within my own experience, my own teachings, and my own understandings, I would typically work with either spirit familiars or servitor familiars. And I would refer to animal familiars as being something more akin to an animal magical companion, because they don't fulfill the same role as a spirit familiar can, because they are a physical animal in a physical form, though many practitioners will have these as their familiars and really enjoy working with them. The bits of the book that you will probably like the most is going to depend on what you would like your familiar to be and the kind of familiars that you are interested in. What I did find interesting, though, is it goes over so many different seals and sigils. All of these are going to be really useful. For instance, this one is the seal of dreaming, and these are employed within the workings of this book to help control and limit the things that your familiar spirit can and cannot do. And I think these are really, really useful to have, especially if you are worried about working with a spirit familiar, as many people tend to be. There are a few things that I will just point out for anyone who has either got this book or is interested in getting this book. Though it does cover a lot of interesting subjects, there are some aspects of it that I find better in other books. So So the section of the book about creating a servitor I didn't find to be particularly useful, and I have found other techniques to be much more successful. I will try to link a few books that I personally prefer on creating servitors in the description box. If you would like to check out a few other books on the subject, I have spoken about these in videos in the past, so I will link the videos as well. So if you're after a technique for creating a servitor, this book might not be the most easy option, but there is an option in here where you can create your own servitor. And then the correspondences I find to be a little bit confusing. The one in particular that might confuse the most people is their elemental correspondence. So for many people who practice witchcraft, they will follow elemental correspondences, and these elements are associated with a colour. Now, in different traditions, the colours are going to vary, so you'll often find that in British traditional witchcraft, the colours vary considerably from what you would see particularly in Wicca. But within this book, I found them to be really counterintuitive, so just bear that in mind. So for instance, the colour red is associated with the fire element, but the colour blue is associated with the air element. The colour yellow is associated with the earth, and the colour green is associated with water, which I found really confusing because usually it's fire red, air yellow, earth green, and water blue, a very obvious take on the colours, whereas this is slightly different. So if you are used to a slightly different colour correspondence, you might find the correspondences in this book a little confusing, but honestly, it's probably one of the best books on familiars that I have ever read. I do have a few others in my to-be-read pile that I will get round to, hopefully this year, and then I'll try and compare them and see what I think. But yeah, it's an interesting read. All sections might not be for everyone. The next book is one that many of you will probably never have heard of, and you might not even be able to get, but I'll do my best to try and find a link so that if any of you are interested, you can get one. This is actually published by my friend, and she hasn't asked me to do this. I bought the book off her with my own money, and I just really wanted to read it and support her. This is A Witch with a Difference by Louise Bloomer. Some of you in the UK may well know her as the Wiccan Lady. This one is a blend of Wicca and hedge witchcraft, and I thought that was really fascinating. I'm a lover of hedge witchcraft myself. I have been a practitioner and a follower of the Wiccan tradition, but I'm not anymore, and so this one could be good for any of you who would like a blend of these two traditions. So the information on this book goes as follows. She discusses her very different path, old-style Wicca and hedge witchery, and how she manages to make two forms of witchcraft that shouldn't go together fit perfectly for her, talking about her love of herbs and passion for using them in magic, not just spell work, but lotions, potions, incenses, and teas, and the importance of growing what you can and record keeping for future reference and generations to come. Born a witch, but with no idea until much later in life what that actually meant, Louise tells a story of her childhood, finding a name for her beliefs, and where that has taken her in adulthood. And so I just had to get this, even if to just support my friend, and I did enjoy it. It's not a book that I took a great deal of information out of, because it's not really a practice that I would necessarily follow myself. It was one that I really enjoyed reading. It's a fairly easy read. I managed this in one evening, which is pretty quick for me, and it does cover quite a wide array of different subjects. So it goes over what is a Wicca versus what is a hedge witch, what you need to know about each of these different paths, different herbs in witchcraft, considerations that you need to make, simple herbal uses, making magic simple, record keeping, and then a journal at the back, which is good for any of you who don't necessarily have a lot of extra space and maybe you want to dabble in starting a Book of Shadows. There's a section at the back which is kind of like a journal that you can write down the spells and rituals that you've had success with. There are a few things in this book that I did really like though. So within this book, I really enjoyed the herb grimoire, as well as the tinctures, lotions, and potions. And I did say in my little guide here that I will definitely be using the herb grimoire again offhand, because a lot of books that you can find on the subject cover herbs that come from very far off places that I haven't necessarily heard of. Whereas this herb grimoire has herbs by topic, so it covers things like handfastings, fertility, happiness, healing, fairy magic, exorcisms, divination and visions, calling spells, calming and peace spells, cleansing and purification, and it kind of categorizes them all, so it's really easy to access. So if you are ever at any of the shows and you happen to meet the Wiccan Lady, do get her book. I think any of you who are just getting started in witchcraft and Wicca would find this a pretty good read. I think though if you're beyond a beginner, you might not find this one so useful, but for people just getting started, I think this is a really cute, really useful book. The next book that I have is not one that I have in my physical collection. I'm actually reading it as a digital book, and this is more of an update for this book. It's The Black Book of Isobel Gowdie. Now, I have spoken about this book before, so I'm not going to read you the information about it, but for any of you who have been interested in my progress on this book or just curious about it yourself, it is a book that is in kind of two parts. So the first part is all about the confessions of the Scottish witch Isobel Gowdie, or should I say the accused Scottish witch, because we don't actually know whether Isobel Gowdie was actually a witch at all. It includes aspects of confessions that are really fascinating to read, if really heartbreaking. And then in the last half of the book, you have an entire collection of spells that have been adapted from old texts and confessions. And that was the section that I hadn't got to in the last quarterly book breakdown, and now I can tell you, it's really, really good. And I gave this book 5 stars, which so far in this quarterly book breakdown I have not done. This one you already knew that I really liked because I've spoken about it before, but now I've finished it, I will say that some of these spells I will be adapting and adding into my own practice. Not all of them are going to be suitable. Many of them contain a Christian twist because, of course, it is important to remember that during this time period when Isobel Gowdie was accused in the 1600s, Christianity was an integral part of folk magic, and so a lot of the book is based in Christian folk magic, and so that could be really interesting for any of you as well. So yeah, just a quick update. Absolutely loved that book, and if you have been on the fence with it, do get it. Even if you only use the spell section or you only use the history section, I think it could be a fascinating read, especially if you are interested in a little bit more of Scottish folk magic, especially stuff from the early modern period. Okay, back to a book that I do have in my collection. Next up is Yule. Now, this book, many of you will likely recognize. They actually have a series of books for all of the different Sabbats. These are by Llewellyn, and they cover a wide range of different spells and rituals and things that you can do to celebrate the Sabbat season, and I really need to get the rest of the books in this series. Many of you know that I do a Sabbat series on my channel, and I have done since I started it in 2018, and never in my time have I had any of these books, so I started getting them in Yule. I actually only have one. I really need to get the others in this, but they could be useful if you are really interested in learning more about the festivals in modern day practice and how you can adapt it and use it further. So if you enjoyed my videos on the Sabbats but you want to take it further, then the Llewellyn book series could be a really interesting choice. Now, this one is obviously all about Yule, and I know that we're coming up to Astrea, but they do have an Astrea book, so that could be an option if you like the sound of this one. So the information goes as following. Yule, also known as the winter solstice, is celebrated when nighttime has reached its maximum length, and there is a promise of brighter days to come as candles are lit and feasts are enjoyed. This guide shows you how to perform rituals and work magic with the energy of rebirth and renewal that comes with this return of light. It includes rituals, recipes, lore, spells, divination, crafts, correspondences, invocations, prayers, and meditations. Llewellyn's Sabbat Essentials explores the old and new ways of celebrating the seasonal rites that are the cornerstone of the witch's year. So yeah, this one was really interesting. It has a whole bunch of different spells and rituals in them, including like tarot spreads and stuff. So yeah, really interesting read if anyone is interested in learning more about the Sabbats. The next book is Fairies in the Irish Tradition by Molly Gowen. Now, this unfortunately is one that I don't think many people will be able to get hold of, as I'm pretty certain that it is out of print. I'm not going to go too deep into the fairy magic books in this video because I do plan on doing a full in-depth breakdown video of these books in the future, but I will briefly touch on the things that I liked and didn't like. So the book reads as follows: a comprehensive study of the fairy nature and its manifestations in the Irish tradition, illustrated with stories and legends and illuminated with superb work. Contents include fairy nature, fallen angels, elementals and ghosts, fairies in the landscape, the banshee, history of the she, the fairy doctor, Tir na Nog, magical animals, the puka, the king of cats and demon dogs. Many superb illustrations by Lavina Harmer. This book was pretty middle of the road for me in regard to fairy witchcraft and fairy magic books. It does cover a lot of subjects, but one thing I did notice was that many other books on the subject are heavily referenced, and I don't just mean a reference here or there. I mean whole sections of the book I have found in other books on the subject. And so I would say that if you are interested in this book, there are other books that are currently in print that do cover a lot of the same topics, and those I will go over further and in completeness in my fairy book video that I am currently working on. Now, there are a few good things about this book, and one of those is that it does cover a lot of subjects in a fairly small book, and it's fairly accessible if you aren't much of a reader. Now, some of the things that it covers includes Tir na Nog, the Tuatha de Danann, and yes, I'm probably butchering all of the words. We then also have the Sidhe, Fairy Wraths, Witches and Banshees, Mermaids and Merrows, the Puka, Changelings and Fairy Doctors, and it does have a further reading section, which you know I always appreciate. It does also go over several deities that many of you will likely recognise, but probably don't realise are part of the Tuatha de Danann, including the Dagda, Brigid, Lugh, and Ogma, whose name is given to the Owen, which is something I've spoken of briefly in the past. Now, for me, the downsides of this book is that a lot of the information does come from other sources, and so if you are interested, you can probably find the other sources of information a lot more easily. The other downside I have with this book is that a lot of different spirits are encompassed by the term fairy, and this includes things that many people probably wouldn't consider to be the fae folk. Now, it is important to remember that even within the British Isles, there are many different traditions surrounding the fae folk, and different places and different people are going to have different classifications for what it means and what falls under it. So within this book, the author does classify, quote, "The term fairies is in fact a generic term for a whole host of different deities, spirits, ghosts, leprechauns, magical and demonic animals, wise men, ancestors, changelings, mermaids, banshees, kings, queens, genii, elementals, and many more," end quote. Now, many people might classify all of these things as being part of the Fae, whereas there are many other people who wouldn't. So for me, wise men are not a member of the Fae because they are physical people that existed. Ghosts in the form of humans who have passed over also don't fall under Fae to me, whereas many other people do consider the ancestors to be a part of the Fae collective. And many people would consider genies or jinn separate because they are from a different geographical location and a different culture and history. And so I think it's really going to depend on where you fall on this and the kind of things that you personally would consider to be fae and the things that you wouldn't. So yeah, all in all, it was a really enjoyable read and I would definitely read it again. But if I'm looking for books on this subject, it isn't going to be one that I would necessarily hunt down, especially given the fact that it's out of print and it might be really crazy expensive now, or it might simply be not accessible. Next up, we have a book that I've spoken of before in one of my haul videos. I actually think it was my last Glastonbury haul video, and that is Air Magic by Astrea Taylor. Now, this is one of Llewellyn's Element series, and I have 2 or 3 now. I think I have the fire, the water and the air element, so I'm just missing the earth element. And these books are all about the element, how to connect with them, how to work with them, and I was really interested in them. And if you are looking for books on elemental magic and you want a book that's dedicated to a certain element, maybe you only want to work with one element, or perhaps one of your elements is not so easy for you to work with as all of the others, a dedicated book on the subject could be a good way of including and incorporating it a little bit more into your magical practice. So, the information on this book goes as follows. Inspire your craft with the history, lore, and practice of air magic. Filled with spells, rituals, meditations, and correspondences, this impressive entry in Llewellyn's Elements of Witchcraft series strengthens your connection to the element of air. Astrea Taylor presents amazing methods for activating the air energy within you and raising your practice to new heights. Learn about the magical realm of air and how to transmit your intentions into it, enhance your spiritual practice with a deeper awareness of the magic of words, incense, wind, sounds, and aromas. This enlightening book also features contributions from well-known writers including Laura Tempest Zakroff and Phoenix LaFay, with captivating insights on air deities, animal guides, sacred sites, herbs, crystals, and more. Air magic empowers you to harness the element of air and take flight. So it sounds interesting, right? At least I thought it sounded interesting in the shop, and it does cover quite a wide array of different topics. This includes air throughout time and culture, mythological air beasts and places, air and the divine, air sacred sites, as well as using the element of air as an altar. It covers the element of air in magic, as well as air within the tarot, air herbs and botanicals, crystals and stones, animal guides, recipes, rituals, and spellcrafts, including incense, wind, sounds and words, airy meditations, spells and rituals, holidays, and air within the Wheel of the Year, as well as a few different essays from different authors, which many of you will likely have heard of. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It nearly got 5 stars as it does contain a lot of good information, but for me personally, I find that I'd already known a lot of the information in this book, and so there wasn't all that much that I could add in that was fresh to me, that I could add in to rejuvenate my element practice. And that's the one thing I will say about this book. If you are a beginner to elemental magic, these books are really, really good. They contain so much information that you're going to find useful, active, practical information, guides and techniques and spells and rituals that you can add and edit and alter and make your own within your practice. But if you are more advanced within your practice, if you already practice elemental magic, you might find that a lot of the information, if not all of the information in this book, is stuff that you already know, and so it might not be the best book for developing your practice further. So if you're more of an advanced practitioner, this one might be a little too basic and beginner. It might not give you anything new, but if you're new, then it could be really good because everything in there is going to be new to you and it's really beautifully written. The next book is one that I haven't even finished yet and I already love it, and that is The Witch's Cabinet by Corinne Boyer. Now, I am only partway through this book. It's also going to be included in the next quarterly book breakdown where hopefully I will have finished it because I am like halfway through-ish, and I adore this book. This one is all about the magical plants found within folk tradition, primarily within Northwestern Europe and North America, but it does give a little bit of a glimpse into other areas as well. So, the information on this one goes as follows. Plant folklore contains a persistent group of plants associated with witches and baneful magic. These spells, rituals, and taboos reflect a hidden dimension of the vegetal world, mantled with ominous attributes. The Witch's Cabinet contains 13 essays on these dark plant aspects, revealing their powers, fearsome qualities, and occult uses. Certain trees were considered cursed and thought to carry afflicted power to be exploited by witches. Particular roots and flowers were used for causing diseases, conjuring demons, or bringing nightmares. Other plants fell under the governance of Satan and were used to gain the powers of witchcraft itself. A particularly pernicious reservoir of corrupt power was the graveyard, with a unique retinue of plants all its own. Not all such herbal lore is malevolent. Countless teachings reveal how certain plants, sometimes the same ones which are considered cursed, can protect a person from witches, evil spirits, and other users of malefic magic. Other plants of dark character, like hawthorn, were in perpetual communion with the souls of the dead and possessed the power to reveal hidden treasure. As a meditation of the shrouded dimensions of plant folklore, the Witch's Cabinet approaches this often disquieting garden holistically, a gathering of allied plant powers, many of which contain certain keys to spiritual transformation, healing, and occult mysteries of the plant world. So, yeah. Super interesting. The only negative I have about this book so far is that because it is a series of essays, there are several repeating aspects of this book. So for instance, there will be a section about seeds, and in that several plants are mentioned and their mythology is spoken about. And then when that plant appears in a later essay, the same information is repeated again, because obviously the book was created from several freestanding essays that have been combined together. So if you can deal with that, this book is really, really good. I am thoroughly enjoying it and I'm looking forward to finishing it. I'm over halfway through now and I am going to power on. The next book is an interesting one that I don't see being spoken of enough, and that is 6 Ways by Aidan Wachter. At least I think that's how you say their name. Editing me here. It's actually Aidan, and I have no idea how I managed to get that name so badly wrong while I was filming this. It's not even a particularly difficult name. I think my brain just had a fart moment and I just couldn't pronounce it. So yeah, it's Aidan, not whatever on earth I just said. This one is a really interesting book. It's all about approaches and entries for practical magic. The one thing I will say, just before I do anything regarding this book, is that if you are interested in this one, I would recommend having at least one, maybe a few beginner books and some beginner practices under your belt first, because this one, surprisingly, is not all that much of a beginner-friendly book. So, the information on this one goes as follows. 6 Ways is a handbook of magic and sorcery, rooted in witchcraft, folk magic, chaos magic, and animistic spirit work. Subjects covered include sigils, servitors, meditation trance, spiritual cleansing, warding, dream sorcery, candle magic, talismanic magic, vessel work, and tending to the spirit ecologies we live with and in. 6 Ways looks at how and why to build relationships in all of the worlds, manifest and unmanifest, that allow us to perform effective magic. Effective magic is magic that changes us on the levels of mind, soul, and spirit, while improving our real-world circumstances. The focus is on finding pathways to the other world and building symbolic relationships with the others. This includes powers, spirits, and allies that dwell there. Sorcery then becomes the practice of working within these relationships to bring about the changes we seek in our lives. Now, it does sound a lot more beginner-friendly in that information than it maybe is. It's not that it's going to be particularly bad for a beginner, but it is something that I would maybe suggest having something like Psychic Witch by Matt Oren alongside, so that you can really get a feel of the kind of things that it's referring to. I have written a few notes on this, as I'm only partway through, but I do say that it's a book on nothing and everything, and I say that in the most positive way that I can. The author is coming at this as a practical guidebook to their form of magical practice. It's a non-religious, non-dogmatic way that allows us to choose what works and leave behind everything that doesn't. It's taken from many different sources and adapted in many different ways, and it's completely unique to the person who wrote the book. They then allow you to take that information and adapt it further into your own practice to use what works and leave what doesn't in your own unique system. One of the earliest chapters, I think chapter 2, starts with a little ritual that you can do whilst reading the book. So this very much seems the kind of book that means you have to do the work. It gets straight into it. So I would recommend having a few beginner books under your belt first, and maybe a bit of understanding of energy work, grounding, and centering, because that will make things easier. And I've not gotten into the book really yet, and that's my immediate thoughts on it. So I'll have to let you know what I think of this book when I've got a little bit more into it, but so far, it seems really interesting. And then the last book in this list is A Witch's Guide to Fairy Folk by Edain McCoy. Now, I'm not really too far into this book, so I can't give that much information on it, but so far, it might not be one of my favourite books on fairy magic, but we'll have to see. I'm going to keep an open mind. The information on this book goes as follows. Explore the lore and legends of the land of the fairies in this practical guide to working with the wee folk, from fairy mythology to the best ways and places to find and work with fairies. A Witch's Guide to Fairy Folk has everything you need to establish a strong relationships with the inhabitants of the enchanted realm. Let fairy powers aid your magic and rituals, learn how and where to contact fairy folk, discover how fairies can help you with divination, past life recall, scrying and spiritual quests, identify fairy types, the ones that are most suited to your magic, travel to fairyland through guided meditations. This book also features a comprehensive dictionary of fairy folk with essential details on over 200 beings, from elvens to will-o-wisps, covering lands of origin, alternate names, elemental associations, appearances, and temperaments, most active times, lore, preferred environments, how to make contact, and what magical and ritual help the beings provide. Now, so far, to me, this is a book of two halves. The bit about how to work with the fair folk, I don't like particularly much, but I will keep reading to give you a better understanding of it later on. But the section about information of the fair folk, where they are, when they're most active, their appearance and temperament, their histories, that section I really enjoy. This book will probably end up in my fairy magic series, but I'm gonna have to keep reading it to get a grasp of everything I like about it. So those are all of the books that we're going to talk about today. Let me know if any of these have piqued your interest. Have you read any of them? What did you think of them? Feel free to let me know down in the comment section. What books are you currently reading? I would love to know, whether that is fiction and fantasy or witchcraft related, whatever it is, feel free to let us know in the comment section. If you would like more in-depth book reviews, I am posting one every single month on my Patreon. These are nitty-gritty deep dives into a singular book, picking apart the things I liked and didn't like. So if that's the kind of thing that you're after, the link for that will be in the description box. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to let me know by liking this video. If you do have any questions, comments, concerns, video ideas, or just want to chit chat with the community, feel free to post a comment down in the comment section. And if you do enjoy the magical content on this channel or in this video, feel free to subscribe. It is completely free, and I post videos every single week. So with that all being said, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you have a marvelous magical day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye! It's been a while since I last filmed. The last video I did was actually the live stream, so I'm not used to filming, and I'm not sure why I decided it would be a great idea to film at, what time even is it? 9:10 on a Saturday night. Why do I do this to myself? This is forever my question. So, yes, that's the plan. Do I have a gap in my eyebrow? I've gone doolally already. That didn't take long, did it? So, how should we do this? I'm curious, for any of you who are still here at the end of the video, do you like the chronological style of quarterly book breakdowns or just book reviews where like I go through them in the order that I read them in? Or do you prefer like finished and then unfinished being a separate category? Let me know. I'd love to know. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do this. I might just start at the top of my sheet and work down. I've also never shown books in the quarterly book breakdowns. I've always just like done a digital thing, but I don't know. I fancy trying something different. Fairies in the Irish tradition go here. Air magic. Some of these I'm also not going to touch on like super in depth because I haven't read them in their entirety, or I'm going to put them in other videos. So I don't want to like give too much away, like too much. Okay. Next. Ha ha ha. Do 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 do.